was this time yesterday, after a bit of shouting last night. So we're going to talk about Good Agile, Bad Agile, and I'll try and get through the talk without saying Bad Agile. So I'm my name's Karl Scotland. I'm an independent Lean and Agile consultant. I'll maybe kind of talk a little bit about more my history as to kind of why I got into this a little bit later. I guess the main thing that triggered this talk was going into a customer client I was working with. It's probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and they were looking to improve their agility. They were an interesting kind of one of these kind of definitely unique scenarios. They were doing very complex software, kind of cutting edge stuff, middleware, set-top boxes, kind of products going out into the homes with big PR marketing launches, kind of well-known brand, with kind of definite delivery dates that were already being promoted. And I was kind of asked to go in and see how I could help them. And one of the early questions of the product manager, he wasn't being awkward, it was a genuine question. He said, how do we know whether Agile's working then? So you're coming in as an Agile coach, how do we know whether this is making a difference or not? So before I tell you how I answered the question, because at the time I suddenly kind of answered the question differently to the way I've answered it before. And the first time I've been asked the question, it's certainly not the last time I've been asked that question. But I certainly at the time, I kind of, whatever the timing or whatever I was kind of reading that was going on at the time, I answered it slightly differently at that time. But before I get into how I answered the question, I'm going to find out what you think. So we're going to use an app called holerary.com. So get your mobile phones out, or iPads or whatever you've got, laptops. If you go to holerary.com /agcom18, when I click onto the next slide, you should get a poll activated, so I'll just give you a little bit of time. Well, it's not going to look like that because this is going to be free-form text, but there will be a question on there. You'll get to answer the question, and then we'll see what all the collected results are up on the screen. So the question then is how would you know whether Agile is working? So type in your response. Give you a bit of time. I'll get a feel for how you would answer that question before I tell you how I would answer it. Twice the work done in half the time. Who's been reading a book? What's the 5 teams there? Power teams, quality, value. Comparing stats before and after. Okay, metric stats, so yeah, looking at data. Okay, the mortgage is paid. I think I can pay my mortgage without being Agile. So there's a variety of answers there, aren't there? Kind of lots of different aspects of it. There's no kind of one definite answer. So I'm just going to. We could probably just watch this for an hour now. But in the interest of content, I'm going to move forward. So how did I answer this question? So I cheated slightly because I didn't really answer the question. I just said, well, how do we know whether anything is working? So for me, it was not about is Agile working or not. I don't actually think that's a useful question to answer. It's more about is the business being successful. So Agile is working if the business is being successful, really. So it's really how do we know whether the business is being successful, and what does it mean for the business and the organisation to be successful? And that then links back to what's our organisational strategy. So I think this is why I kind of resonated at the time, because I was looking at getting into strategy and thinking about what's the relationship between Agile and strategy? What are our organisational strategies? And that was just kind of part of my journey. So I got into Agile around about 99, 2000, so definitely not 2010. Initially extreme programming, I was a developer, then Scrum came along and became popular, and I kind of did that training certification, and then got safe since then, and I was kind of lucky enough to be getting involved in Kanban in 2007. So I've kind of seen lots of different ways of working, and every time I think, oh, this is the next big thing, this is it, we've advanced it now, there's always some new thing that comes along. So I guess I'm now always looking for what new area can I get into, and for me it was strategy. So we kind of got into Agile at scale, but actually the thing that I think is missing from something like the Scale Agile framework is how does that align to organisational strategy? There's a little kind of bar chart that has the word strategy on the picture, but I think that's an area where it's weak. So I'm kind of looking at organisational strategy, but I don't really know anything about strategy. I'm not a strategy expert, so I thought I'd better go off and do a little bit of reading. And I read this book by Richard Runnels called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. So this talk is basically a talk about this book. I make no apologies about that, but I'm not just going to tell you what's in the book. I'm going to try and apply that. So this is one of those books that I read, and as I was reading it, I was thinking, this just makes perfect sense. This helps me explain where Agile works, and this helps me explain where Agile doesn't work. So I think we can take these ideas, and hence this talk actually, we'll just, instead of calling it Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, let's call it Good Agile, Bad Agile, and kind of see how we can take these ideas and make them work in organisations. So, next poll. Before we get into what is Good Agile or what is Bad Agile, I'm going to kind of find out, thinking about a recent development initiative that you've worked on, project, team, whatever you want to call it, how would you describe it? So would you describe it as Good Agile, would you describe it as Bad Agile, or maybe it's not even Agile at all? So answer that question, and then we can look at the results. I'm not going to show you the results until all the answers are there. Okay, so what have we got there? Pretty even split. Mostly Good Agile. Quite a lot of Bad Agile. Not much not Agile. All right. So I'll go through and I'll kind of talk about some ways of thinking about Bad Agile, some ways of thinking about Good Agile, and then maybe we'll come back to this at the end of the day and I'm being attacked by a fly. See whether you've changed your mind, changed your opinion, whether it kind of given you anything different to think about. So the book is split into three sections. So we'll talk about Bad Agile first and relate Bad Agile to Bad Strategy. Then we'll talk more about what Good Agile might look like in relationship to Good Strategy. And then he has this final section on thinking like a strategist, which again kind of made me think, actually, yeah, if we take what he describes as thinking like a strategist and how do you think about this stuff, we can again apply it sort of about what does it mean to think like an agilist. So bad strategy. So have a quick read of that strategy. Put your hands up if you think I've stolen your organisational strategy. Hopefully nobody does. Anybody know where this comes from?
Not Walton's generator, is it?
Yeah. So this is a nice little thing. Strategy - Mad Libs. You can just hit refresh and it'll just give you a new strategy. Just thrown together a kind of random mix of buzzwords. So I just hit F5 a few times until I got one which started our strategy agile and I went, perfect, that's the one. So now basically I just go around telling organisations to do this. The talk is done, thank you very much. No, so yeah, lots of buzzwords, it's meaningless, it's not actionable. So we can kind of use that as a way of thinking about four different kind of facets of what might be bad strategy or bad agile. So the first one is what I call fluffy agile. Rummel just described it as fluff. So this is where it's just buzzwords. People are using the right words because they're cool things to do because some consultants come in and told them to use these words and this is what our competitors are doing. So we're just using the words. It's just platitudes. It doesn't really mean anything. There's nothing concrete in there. So if your Agile is just kind of, we've just renamed our daily meetings to be standard meetings, and we're just following the same process, but we're just calling this 2-week thing a sprint now. That's probably fluffy Agile. We've just taken some of the terminology, taken some of the words, applied it to what we're doing, but we haven't really changed. So that's kind of what I call fluffy Agile. The next one is aimless Agile. Rommel calls this, describes this as a strategy where there's a failure to face a challenge. Again, we're doing this because we've not really figured out what problem we're trying to solve. Again, we're doing it, kind of typically it's best practice. It's what our competition are doing. Again, some highly paid consultant came in and said, you guys need to be doing Agile, so we're just going to implement scaled Agile framework, or less, or the Spotify model. We don't really know why we're doing it, other than somebody's told us to do it. Seeing some people kind of nodding their heads and loving this, kind of seen this before. So it's just pretty aimless. We don't really know why we're doing it. We're just doing it because we've been told to do it. So that's aimless Agile. The next one is what I call wishful Agile. Rommel describes it as mistaking goals for strategies. So this is where you just, if only we were more agile, we would be getting better. We just need to be more agile. So there's this idea of some agile nirvana in the future, some future state where the world is better, we're killing the competition, and if only we could just get agile right, we would be in that nirvana. Again, it's not really thinking about what problem we're trying to solve, not really kind of tying it back into any kind of immediate, concrete business problem. It's just, wouldn't it be nice if we were more agile? So that's wishful Agile. And then the last one is what I call horoscopic Agile. Kind of took this because I used to work with a guy who used to talk about strategy horoscopes. Rommel describes this as just bad strategic objectives. So just, a means to an end, but not really kind of, again, it's not really addressing a concrete problem. So I call these horoscopic Agile because it's generally, we're just using Agile as an excuse to carry on doing the same thing. So we're not really changing again, but, Agile testing. We've not really changed the way we're doing testing. We still have this big test group that's its own group, and we're still doing testing at the end. But it's okay, it's Agile testing now. So we can justify doing whatever you like just by calling it Agile. And we're not really changing anything. So it's just like a horoscope, you read a horoscope, and whatever happens in that day, a good horoscope is written in such a way that you can kind of go, oh yeah, the horoscope came true. So horoscopic Agile is whatever we can do, we're going to go, oh yeah, no, we're Agile. Because we've called it Agile testing now, or Agile documentation. So that's the 4 ones. So there's these 4 ways of thinking about bad strategy that I think we can kind of look at and go, actually, yeah, there's bad Agile when we're just using the words without changing. We're just using it as a best practice. We're just kind of hoping that it's going to solve problems in some kind of future, and we're just really using it to justify what we're doing without changing. So, next poll. Thinking about those. So actually, before you fill in the poll, just turn to the next person next to you and have a quick conversation about this. I'm just going to talk to the person next to you about which of those 4 things, the way I described them, which would you say is more prevalent? Which one really resonated with you that you have seen in your organisation or you've seen in a previous organisation? So just spend a couple of minutes chatting about that, and then once you've chatted, fill in the poll and we'll kind of see what the general consensus is. Which of these do you think is more prevalent? Right. So I think it seems like fluffy Agile is a clear winner now. So lots of people experience just using the words, but it not really meaning anything, not really addressing any problem. Pretty even split between horoscopic and wishful, aimless down the end. I think it is difficult to choose one over the other. I kind of find it hard because I think the core of it is that you're not addressing a problem. That's kind of the common pattern. I think you don't really know why you're doing it. You're just using the words and you're just hoping it's going to help. That's kind of generally what it comes down to. So let's move on. So, okay, that's the bad side of things. So how do we kind of take that and say, well, so what does good strategy look like? Or good agile. So Rummel has what he calls, going back to the strategy side of things, he has what he calls a strategy kernel, kind of three facets of strategy which should be there. They're not the only things, they don't kind of exclusively kind of define the strategy space. But he said you should have this kernel of three things in a good strategy. Again, I kind of looked at this and I went, yeah, that helped me understand how we can really kind of get the best of Agile. So the first is having a diagnosis. So a diagnosis of your current situation. That's really kind of saying, what problem are we trying to solve? Why are we doing Agile in the first place? So we need to have a diagnosis. Once we have a diagnosis, then we can start talking about what do we do about this. So diagnosis then really identifies your critical challenges or opportunities. What are the key things you need to focus on in order to improve? So what is stopping you achieving your aspirations? So we want to do some stuff. We've looked at the way things are, and we need to fix that in order to improve. So that's you've done your diagnosis. Having identified where you need to focus, what those critical challenges and opportunities are, you can then put some guiding policies in place on how you're going to address those. Now, they're guiding policies. They don't tell you what to do, but they help you make decisions. They help you focus. So the guiding policies, I think, is what most people kind of think of as strategy. It's what should we do, what should we not do, how do we make decisions? So I kind of think of strategy as, it's a choice about how we're going to make choices, or a decision about what decisions we should make. Guiding policies then, so what things should we focus on in order to deal with what we learned in our diagnosis? And then you can move into coherent action. So the third thing is actually, what are we going to do? What are we going to do that's coherent with our guiding policies and our diagnosis? So I think we need to take that and think about, where does Agile fit into that? So hopefully we've done some diagnosis and we can see how, is Agile a guiding policy around how we're going to address what we discovered in the diagnosis? Or maybe you're going to take elements of Agile and your Agile transition, whatever, is your coherent action. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer there, but I think you should be able to tell a story around, we're doing these practices, we're using these techniques, we're working in this way, because it's going to help us be aligned with these guiding policies, because it's going to help solve this critical challenge or take advantage of this critical opportunity that's related to the diagnosis. And if you can get it back down to diagnosis, I think that the crux of it is you're more likely to have good Agile. So what do we do with that? He describes a good strategy then, and this is kind of really guiding policies side of things, is a good strategy works by harnessing power and applying it where it will have greatest effect. Again, let's replace the word strategy with Agile. Good Agile works by harnessing power and applying it where it will have greatest effect. I kind of quite like that definition of Agile. It is about taking advantage of something. It's not just doing things for the sake of it. It's not just about hoping for the best. It is this idea of harnessing sources of power. So Rummel lists a number of sources of power. And again, this isn't an exclusive list, and these things are not necessarily unique and independent from each other, but there's a really nice, and he kind of spends a kind of chapter on each of these. So it goes into a lot of detail with some good examples. But again, there's some nice ways of thinking about, how does Agile relate to each of these? How does Agile help leverage these sources of power, or harness these sources of power? So I'm going to talk about each of these kind of very briefly. While I'm talking about them, think about, how does this relate to Agile? What is it that we do with our Agile processes and practices and techniques that help us harness these sources of power potentially? So leverage, the first one, leverage then is the idea of, it's almost like the Pareto rule. Where can we put in a small amount of effort to get a big gain? So where can we focus some energy and a kind of a pivot point that small investment, large return. So that's about kind of where can you get most leverage with what you're doing. Second one, proximate objects. This is the idea of something that's proximate, it's close enough, which means it's achievable. So we're not sending something that's like a massive grand vision that's, that's almost kind of that wishful thinking idea. it's close enough that people can kind of almost hold on to it, and therefore it feels achievable. That I really like the example here that he uses for getting the man on the moon. So when I forgot his name now, who was it? The kind of man on the moon by the end of the century. Now most people kind of thought that was kind of crazy talk. Actually, it turns out that's a really good example of a proximate object, because the people in NASA, they knew it was achievable, but it was ambitious enough to really focus people. So how can we define proximate objects with our agile transformations so that there's something kind of tangible, close enough to be able to kind of almost reach out and touch, that's really going to help us kind of go, yeah, we can get there, we can do that, that's why we're doing agile. Chain link systems, so the idea that organisations as systems can be thought of as a chain, and one of those chains will be the weakest link. So if we can understand where the weakest link is, a potentially good strategy is to focus on strengthening that weakest link. Okay? So kind of, it's basically theory of constraints. I'll give you that one for free. It's kind of talking about theory of constraints, understanding where the weakness is, making that link stronger, and then kind of, well, where's the next weak link, make that link stronger. So maybe that's a kind of way of thinking about strategy. How does Agile help you with that? Design, how do you, and this is like organisational design. How can you design your organisation so that everything works together and is coordinated together to help you achieve something? You know, maybe to help you achieve your proximate object. So strategy might be around the design of your organisation or the design of your product, which helps you kind of get the everything works together. So you know the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. It's kind of a product of the interactions and all that. The systems thinking side of things. So again, I think design is really looking at it from a systems thinking perspective. So how do you get your organisation designed? How does Agile help with that? Focus. Just focusing on one thing. Kind of pretty simple, this one. If you focus on one thing, that's your strategy. So your strategy can be let's figure out what the one thing should be. Focus on that. We'll achieve our results. Growth, understanding. So this isn't growth as a kind of an action almost. It's growth as an outcome. So what things can we do which will achieve growth in certain areas? So can we achieve growth in certain markets or certain customer bases? Therefore, if we go after those markets or customer bases, we will achieve growth. So again, how does Agile relate to the idea of growth as a strategy? Advantage is probably your kind of just typical competitive advantage. Where do we as an organisation, or where can we as an organisation have an advantage over our competitors? Which means how can we be different? So he talks about asymmetries. So rather than just being the same as every other organisation, if you can figure out how you can be different to all your competitors, that can be an advantage. So the idea of kind of difference and asymmetry is an advantage. Dynamics. So markets move, technologies change, so things are constantly, there's constant dynamics, nothing stays the same. So the idea of dynamics as harnessing power is spotting the wave, so that the metaphor of the wave coming in, and being ready, anticipating change, so that when change happens, you can surf that wave, you can ride that wave, and equally anticipating the dynamics of a wave crashing, so you're kind of off the wave before it takes you under, and you can start getting ready for the next wave. So looking at your market and the kind of the environment going around you, seeing what the dynamics are and anticipating certain dynamics so that you can take advantage of it before competitors do, for example. And then the last one, inertia and entropy. I'm quite pleased that the keynote this morning talked about entropy. Inertia, is resistance to change. So what Rummels is talking about here is just having less inertia. You can harness power by having less inertia and less entropy than your competitors. Or maybe you can do things which create inertia or entropy for your competitors. So the inertia is a resistance to change, and then usually as a result of inertia you then get into entropy, which is that's kind of collapse into disorder. So you see when organisations kind of fail, it's usually because you can look back and identify this inertia, They didn't change in the way they did, and then because of that inertia, they kind of collapsed. Disorder stuck in, and then they died. Only lots of good examples of that. So that's kind of a lightning fast run through those. What I'm interested in now is your thoughts. So hopefully while I was doing that, you were kind of thinking around some ideas. I was desperately trying not to, other than the theory of constraints one I gave you, I was desperately trying not to give you seed any ideas in with you. But turn to the person next to you again, so in pairs, have a conversation around, of this list of sources of power, how does harnessing these sources of power relate to Agile? Agile transformations, Agile processes, Agile tools and techniques? Or put another way around, how do Agile tools and techniques enable us to harness some of these sources of power? So have a conversation around that for a few minutes, and then I'll put another poll up and I'm going to find out which ones you thought were the most relevant to Agile and which ones were the least relevant to Agile. So, talk in pairs. Okay. So quick poll then, quick time poll again.
Knowledge sharing at the team with it.
So what you should now be able to do on the poll is stack rank these sources of power. So last time I did this there were some problems, but I could reproduce it, so hopefully it works okay today. You should be able to kind of drag them so you think that the one you think is the most relevant, so maybe the one you kind of agreed in your group is the most relevant is towards the top, and the ones you think are least relevant at the bottom, don't worry about it, being absolutely perfect in the middle. Just want to kind of get a feel for, as a group, which ones do you think of these sources of power are most relevant to Agile, and which ones maybe you think are least relevant?
Let's do it together. Oh yeah, I'll give it to you.
So, the results are in. So, focus. So, which groups talked about focus as so you want to kind of say a little bit about how does Agile relate to focus and help with focus?
So it's probably about actually concentrating on finishing and actually looking at sort of small achievable goals and actually focus on what's probably the most important, the things which are the most important at first.
Yeah, absolutely. So that idea of your backlog and working just things at the top of the backlog, or limiting work in process, absolutely is all about focus. Does anybody say anything different about focus?
The role of the Scrum Master was really important. The focus of the team and kind of defend them from any outside.
Right. Yeah. So that idea of not being distracted, not being pulled out, and kind of protecting the team. Yeah, it's all about kind of helping the team focus.
That's quite interesting, because typically a product owner would be your kind of person that would drive that focus in terms of this is the value that we're trying to achieve for customers. Scrum Master trying to control that. So it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, I think it's so again, it's a good example. Is this if you see Scrum Master somewhere, protect the team, but actually not really helping the team focus.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. If we kind of go back, is like actually what we're trying to do is, as an organisation, focus on this thing, and the Scrum Master plays a role in that. Absolutely, the product owner needs to play a role in that. If we all understand what we're focusing on, then it's more likely to be effective, as opposed to we have a Scrum Master, they're supposed to protect the team.
Yeah.
And they're going to do the meetings, and it just becomes that kind of fluffy Agile game. Yeah. What about proximate objects? So who talked about, which groups talked about proximate objects? Anyone kind of say what you talked about?
Yeah. So there's a bit more on focus as well. I was actually looking for small achievable steps and actually going for the quick wins and the low hanging fruit, looking for high value, easy wins. And achievable goals, and so we've got that sort of cadence of work going through. Yeah.
I think a good way of thinking about an MVP.
Yes.
MVP is one of those terms that gets used and abused. An MVP should be kind of good proximate objects. That's what we're. And again, yeah, absolutely. If you're focusing on a proximate object, we're all kind of getting towards this MVP, this release, this next big set of functionality or whatever. Yeah.
A quick question. Does our businesses or our organizations are not totally the other way around, which means they think from 9, 8. So we are focused in Agile, but our businesses and the CEOs of this world thinks about growth, the advantage. They very rarely think about the focus. Isn't that interesting, the way we think?
I think, yeah, so and I think that's why I kind of quite like this exercise, because maybe we could say the business is interested in growth. So I think it's more about then we need to talk about how does Agile help the organisation grow. Now I think growth on its own then is it's not on its own. It's how do we grow?
Sure.
We're probably going to grow by focusing on a proximate object, which we think is in the right market or something.
Yeah, it's just finding clarity in the language to express the growth in the parameters that we are trying to do.
Yes.
In fact, right?
So it's more about less about Agile, but how we're using Agile to build things which will result in growth.
Because if you show this to the CEO and say, hey, can I do the Agile transformation, we'll be very focused. And he said, like, well, but I need number 9, right? And then this is it.
Yeah, and I think it's so ranking them like this is a bit of an artificial exercise, because they're not that independent. Absolutely.
I agree with that. I think it looks. I agree with Gentleman here. It looks contradictory to what CEOs would consider to be effective strategy.
Yeah.
It would say, well, Agile doesn't work for me then.
Correct.
If that's the case.
I guess that's not necessarily the point I'm trying to make.
Exactly, but that's how we come over to the initiator.
Yeah.
If you look at that,
I think we need to be able to make that connection. So we need to be able to talk to the CEOs and understand what their strategy is, so that whatever we're doing with Agile is aligned with that strategy. So at the end of the day, I think Good Agile is Agile that is aligned with your organisational strategy. If your organisational strategy is around growth, we need to figure out what is it that we're doing, what is it about our Agile transformation which is going to enable that growth. Now, I think it's coming out lower here because there's less of a direct link. But that's not to say there's no link. We need to figure out what the link is.
Is that because the teams do not really think on that kind of a level? Which means we here think about, let's say, on the level of strategy for our teams, for our projects, for our products, and then we don't really consider how far further up the chain we could go. And that's why our answers are focused on the things that we can actually impact rather than the bigger organization stuff.
Yeah, which is not wrong.
Correct.
Yeah. So did anybody talk about growth in their groups? Just out of interest. Okay.
To me, it's like you almost feel like in the current size that you are, it's difficult enough trying to get it right. So thinking about growing and getting it right is too much.
Yeah, and that's why I think Robert talks very much about growth as the outcome. So we're doing stuff, and we hope that if we do the right stuff in the right way, growth will be an outcome. It's not. I think if you try and grow too directly, so it's kind of like obliquity. It's an oblique outcome. If you try and do it too intentionally directly, it'll be artificial. Yeah. Anything else? Did anybody else kind of want to say anything more? Any kind of group have some interesting conversation about some of the other ones? I don't have time to go through them all individually. Yeah.
We had a bit of a conversation about leverage in terms of getting the team involved more in the work that's going on. So rather than product owners and architects coming along and saying to the team, you must go away and do this, getting the team to use some of that knowledge within themselves as well. Kind of leverage their expertise and their experience.
Yes.
And become more involved.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think so I think there's definitely an argument, with Agile we can have more leverage, and then that works in multiple ways. One is by making more use of the people and the skills and the knowledge we have. I also think leverage relates a little bit, which are probably, those top three are kind of related, An MVP gives us leverage because it's the smallest thing we can deliver, which is going to give us the maximum. But and then how do we leverage the people we have as well? Okay. Let's kind of move on. So the last section then is, okay, how do we think like this? How do we actually achieve this? So he kind of says, Ronald says, the most useful shift in viewpoint is thinking about your own thinking. So this is all about how do we think about strategy? How do we think about what we're doing and why we're doing it? And he kind of breaks this down into 3 points. So he talked about the science of strategy. So and I liked again, science of agility. It's a science. We need to try things out, we need to run experiments, we need to have hypotheses. Strategy isn't we come up with a perfect answer and it's going to solve all our problems just like that. Strategy is about trying things out, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, so it's a very kind of an evolutionary fluid thing. Same with agility, you know, this not, you don't just take an out-of-the-box thing. We need to think about what's the right thing for us to do. Going back to the idea of diagnosis, what's our diagnosis of our current situation? How's Agile going to help us with that, rather than just taking a context-free solution and trying to implement it. So thinking it a bit scientifically, where we're going to run experiments and see what works and doesn't work, and then using your head is really, you just think about stuff. Don't just take the first answer that comes along, or don't just do what your consultant tells you to do. Actually use your head, think about stuff, you know, the pros and cons, and then look at a range of alternatives rather than just a single one, and then of that range of alternatives, decide which of those alternatives you're going to use and you're going to try. And then the last one, keeping your head, is then about independent thinking. So don't just follow the crowd. Don't just go with the latest buzzwords and the latest trends. Don't just do the Spotify model because that's what everybody's talking about, that's what everybody's doing. So look at a range of options and then pick the one that's right for you, not the one that seems the most popular. So those three things go together. So I kind of like to then think of this as good agile is thoughtful agile. So consider your context first. So where are you? What's your diagnosis of the current situation that you think Agile is going to help you with? Then don't just copy somebody else. Copy somebody else's framework or somebody else's methods or techniques. And don't just comply. Don't just do what you're told to do. You know, imposed Agile, inflicted Agile. So consider your context, don't just copy people and don't just comply with what you're going to do, but think about this stuff, be thoughtful about it, understand how it's going to help your business, and I think that's what's going to help you have good Agile. So good Agile, defining good Agile is not specific, it's details, it's about thinking about it, looking at a range of options, running some hypotheses, running some tests, seeing what works, doing what's going to work for you, not what's most popular or what you've been told to do. So, kind of final poll. So, kind of going back to the original question, but I've now split Good Agile into intentionally Good Agile and serendipitously Good Agile. So, intentionally Good Agile is, yeah, we're doing what I've just talked about. We're kind of aligning with strategy and we're kind of being thoughtful about it. We're doing what's right for us. We're running experiments. Serendipitously Good Agile is, yeah, I think we're doing Good Agile for the right reasons, just not the way I've described it. So I'm not saying this is the only way of describing Agile. I'm not saying that if you're not thinking about it, that we're using terminology and the ideas that I've used here, that's not the only way of thinking about Good Agile. It's just the way I think about it. If you're Good Agile, do you think you need to like intentionally the way I kind of described it, or no, it's real Good Agile, but just not the way, but it's a nice happy coincidence that it's good, so that sort of thing is good, or Bad Agile and not Agile. I'm kind of curious if anybody's changed their mind as a result of the talk. All right, excellent. So intentionally Good Agile, excellent. It's good to hear that there's people out there that this kind of resonates with, and it kind of this makes sense to you, and this helps you understand why you're doing Good Agile. Maybe the people that are kind of saying they're serendipitously good, this is giving you some ways to think about why what you're doing is Good Agile, and maybe help you be Good Agile. Bad Agile, hopefully you've got some ideas about how to turn that around, some different ways to look at it to improve your Agile, so it's more effective, helps your business more, and than the not Agile crowd of maybe the not Agile crowd now realise they're Bad Agile, or maybe the not Agile crowd now realise it's Good Agile. I don't know. Anybody in that category? No. Okay, so hopefully that was kind of some useful ideas of thinking about Agile and Good Agile and Bad Agile. I'm just going to throw in some other tools and techniques that I use that aligns with this, and I guess I've developed as part of this. So the first one, it looks very complex. I'm kind of going to run through this really quickly, but this is called the X matrix. This is how I try and help people think about what they're doing and why they're doing it, and how their Agile transformations relate to strategy. So in the middle we kind of have kind of the true north. So that's kind of actually almost kind of what's the ultimate proximate object. So kind of what's just out of reach, what do we want to achieve as an organisation. And then down the bottom, our aspirations are kind of slightly more measurable, concrete. What does winning look like for us as an organisation? If we get to the end of the year and we look back and say, yeah, it was a really good year for us as an organisation, how would we define that? So that's that kind of first step in getting towards diagnosis, because then we can say, what's stopping us? What are our challenges which are going to stop us meet our aspirations? So that leads us to defining some strategies. And what we want to do, I'm going to talk about this kind of down here, is be able to show the way that our strategies correlate with our aspirations. It's kind of storytelling. Can we tell a story about how our strategies are going to help us meet our aspirations? And then we kind of do that round. So then we say, evidence. If our strategies are working, what evidence can we look for that give us the confidence that we're on the right track, that the strategy is the right strategy? So this is that kind of the idea of treating it as a science. If we're going to do it as science, we're going to run experiments, we need to look for data. So what evidence, what data are we going to look for? And then the tactics, what are we actually going to do? What agile practices, techniques, other things might we do? And we should be able to see good, kind of strong correlations in these four corners. So a really high level overview, but it's a nice way of talking through and making sure we understand what are we doing? What are we doing with our Agile? How do we know whether Agile is working? Is the evidence? How does that align with our strategy? How is it helping us solve our problems? And ultimately, what are we trying to achieve? And then we can drill that down into another A3, because effectively we're going to go and ask people to go off and do the work. So this is where we start asking people to go off and be thoughtful. So take a problem, take one of those kind of big high-level tactics, go and think through how we're going to approach that. Tie it back to the context. What problem are we trying to solve? What's our intent in solving this problem? What's the higher intent? How does this help the business? Let's make sure people kind of have that alignment and are thinking through what we're doing and why we're doing it. What people do we need? What skills do we need? Boundaries, so what can we do and what we can't do, and what's our plan? So actually, what are we going to start trying? So this is that kind of thoughtful agile, start running some experiments. And then we get down to kind of the actual detailed experiments, where, again, what problem are we trying to solve with this experiment? What's our hypothesis? What's the rationale? Why do we think this is a good thing to try? This is all kind of encouraging disciplined thinking in helping us think through why we're doing stuff rather than just kind of copying it or doing what we're told to do. And then we get into what actions are we going to do? What results are we going to look for? Both looking at success and failure. Failure's okay because it's an experiment. So we want to learn from that. And then similarly, what are we going to do to follow up? So we want these experiments to be kind of small, safe to fail experiments. So I use those A3s with organisations to help people think around and be thoughtful around how they're adopting Agile and make sure they're kind of tracking it and tying it back to business outcomes and business strategy. Oh, come on, that deserves a round. So, thank you. So, 4 questions to ask yourself. So this is kind of the 4 questions to take away. What diagnosis is Agile addressing for you? So what's the critical challenge or opportunity that Agile is addressing? Can you answer that question? Second question to try and answer. What guiding policy does Agile relate to? So how is it strategic? How does it help you decide what you should and shouldn't do with your transformation? Now, if you can't identify something that you wouldn't do, it's probably slightly more horoscopic Agile, because you can just justify anything. Third question, so what coherent actions are you going to take with Agile, and how are they coordinated to support your strategy? So all those tactics, all those things you're going to be doing, they need to all kind of work together as coordinated, coherent action that are aligned with your guiding policies. And then the last one is what sources of power is your strategy harnessing? How does Agile help you apply those strategies, those sources of power? So 4 questions to maybe think around, to help you think about your Agile transformation and help you move from Bad Agile to Good Agile. This is all part of what kind of a body of work that I talk about as strategy deployment. I'll load a blog post on the top URL. templates, if you want to play around with those, they are in the middle URL, and that's the URL for Lean Agile Brighton that I mentioned earlier, which has got nothing to do with the talk at all, other than any opportunity to plug it. And as I said, I have discount codes if you want to go to that. I think we have 5 minutes for questions. Any other questions or comments, if you have any? Yeah.
I'm very interested about that. You show us about the most relevant Agile, most irrelevant Agile. That's we only have 29 people here today. That's our opinion about what we think.
Yeah.
But I think you must host in big events. So, or maybe from your perspective, how do you think? What is the correct order? What is the most?
So kind of difficult. So I see a lot of Bad Agile, but then that's the nature of my job. If there's an organisation of Good Agile, they probably don't need my help. So my perspective is going to be skewed by that. At the end of the day, again, it's all subjective. For me, it's more kind of my intent here, I guess, is to give you some things to think about. It's not about whether it's not judging. It's not right or wrong. Is you kind of just get people to think about, well, actually, how does this relate to what we're doing with Agile? Is there any ideas I can use here? Does this give me some different ways of thinking about what we're doing? If I see stuff that doesn't seem to be working, does this maybe help me identify what's not working? Sorry, I'm not sure whether that answers the question.
No, it's very thoughtful. I gotta say there's something more common answer or curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, I see, going back to the kind of the Bad Agile, I see a lot of what I call fluffy Agile out there, where just people are using the words and kind of fluffy aimless, using the words and imposing it without really thinking about what problem they're trying to solve. So that kind of aimless Agile. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Please, if you've done sketch notes, please tweet them and tag me in them. I'm curious to see them. And email address. If you have any kind of questions, we'll keep in touch, get in touch. Otherwise, thank you very much.